Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Like Haley said, we're joined today by Al Dosen from Arctic Wolf. We're excited to dive into cyber insurance, cyber claims, and incident response, kind of in how all of these things intersect, but more importantly, how your organization can be better prepared for cyber threats that we face today. To kick things off, I do want to kind of start with a quick overview of NIST incident response lifecycle. That's a largely widely recognized framework that guides organizations through the process of handling cybersecurity events. And the NIST model outlines 4 key phases. The first phase, which we'll really be honing in on today, is preparation. And this is kind of where it all starts, right? In this phase, you're not just waiting for an attack, you're actively preparing for one. And in today's world, it's not really a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So that means making sure that you have the right tools, policies, you've got the right plans in place so that when an incident happens, you're ready to respond quickly and effectively. And it also means making sure that any and everyone in your organization knows exactly what to do when and if they detect a cyber attack. The second phase is detection and analysis. Third phase is containment, eradication, and recovery, and that's really containing the threat. And then, of course, post-incident activity is where you wrap things up. And that's where you kind of take a look at what happened during the event, what went well, what didn't. And it all loops back and feeds into how do we change, how we prepare for the next time. So while all of these phases, again, are important, we're really going to zero in on preparation phase because that's where really where the foundation is built. And a strong incident response plan is essential. But preparation also ties directly into cyber insurance and your strategy. So let's take a look at kind of how that plays into your cyber readiness. I'm going to kick it over to Al. And Al, if you don't mind sharing some of your thoughts and your experience on how incident response plans and readiness plans can help people when they do have to file a cyber insurance claim or when they're faced with a cyber event.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad to have the opportunity to share my knowledge, share kind of more about what the industry is looking at in the next, 6, 12, and 24 months. But really, when you look at the preparedness for every organization, all of the executives that I've spoke to over years have always really looked for the opportunity when you ask them the question of like, where do you sit in terms of being ready for an event? Do you know where to start? And a lot of them have various or variable, answers. But really it comes down to when you dig into it, what each customer has for their readiness plan. And I look at it from, every customer is different, but the foundation should be the same. It's really broken up in internally, how many people know what to do, externally, who do you call from a calling tree, and then the data needed to be ready for an event. So I look at it from the perspective of if you educate and enable the people internally to be aware of what happens in the event, that actually can be utilized when the team goes to look at their security posture to get cyber insurance. All of it really flows into that preparedness, because whether you have, the technology investment, the MFA, EDR, backup, good hygiene, and that means versioning, updates, patchwork, you can have all of those things in place. But as an organization, if you don't know who to call first internally, externally, and then the data needed, a lot of that is really a moot point. So what we really like to do is just to make sure that everybody understands, where to start. So, I think Belinda, we can talk a little bit more about what that looks like. But those are some of the key functions to be able to get potentially a discount on your cyber insurance. It's really kind of those controls, if you will, that every broker carrier in the market is looking for. Because when you have to file a claim, knowing who to call externally, the data needed, but really being responsible internally is key to making sure that what your claim looks like at the end of it is how do you guys get back to work?
Yep, agreed. And for those of you who haven't seen a recent cyber insurance application or gone through that process in the past few years,
Mm,
they're asking more and more from
yeah,
organizations about how you are prepared, right? What controls do you have in place? Al mentioned, do you have multi-factor authentication? Well, they're not just asking that for email now. They're asking that for how do you remotely connect? Do you have MFA enabled for your remote connections? Do you
yep,
have it enabled for your privileged access accounts?
yep,
They're asking about your endpoint detection and response, your backups. Do you have some way to collect logs and store logs for an extended period of time? So all of those things they're asking for to determine your risk profile as
mhm,
as someone who they're going to insure. If you don't have those things in place, then that can drive up the cost of your premiums, and it can also make you to where they just won't sign you, they won't take on the risk. So it's really
yep,
important that you factor in those controls, but you've also got that documented and you've got your plans in place and your people know what to do in the event that something happens, like Al mentioned, right? Many
yep,
times we've seen where an event happens over the weekend, right? That's usually where cyber attackers like to target, when everybody's sleeping, when the guards aren't paying attention, right?
right,
But does the people who are working the overnight shift or the weekend shift, do they know what's going to happen? Who do they call? What do they do if something goes bump in the night? Um, and a lot of people do have plans in place. However, those plans aren't necessarily always refreshed. It might be something that's updated once a year. It may be something that's printed out and put on somebody's desk, and it's not really actively communicated through the organization.
mhm,
Another thing that most people forget about is exercising, right? So, do you have some type of tabletop exercise where you go through the scenario every year? You include, people from different departments, from different levels of experience that you can walk through and say, okay, hey, let's role play. Let's say in the event that something happens, what do you do? Who do you call?
mhm,
How are you checking how are you checking that everyone has that information, that they know what to do?
yep. And to add to that, you're spot on that. One of the best profiles that cyber insurance organizations look at today from a risk tolerance. So if a cyber insurance carrier could put in their perfect persona, it really is an organization that does multiple simulations or tabletops a year, that has multi-factor authentication. The other side is the endpoint detection response. You look at the overall, like up backups. What are you doing on your backup critical data? Where are you at with the patchwork? Are you doing patching and updates every 2 weeks, every 30 days? Those that might not patch critical systems every 60 days, they run a bigger risk. But then you couple that with, if you can lay out a plan where marketing, sales, HR, operations, not just IT, but executive teams as well, all understand and take responsibility to know, who am I calling first internally? Who am I calling externally? We all know that, IT handles a lot of those things, but if they're gone, or critical people are gone, or somebody in marketing, somebody in HR, sales realizes that things have been compromised, somebody in the warehouse realizes things have been compromised, do they know who to call internally, externally? And then the internal IT team, do they know what to do and how to be able to really look at it from the total responsibility as an organization, that awareness component. I think somebody just put it on there, James put on there, cross departmental. Agree. That is exactly the key component to making sure that your security posture goes into your security strategy, that will allow them the potential to have brokers and carriers go to work to get you a better rate on your cyber insurance. What we always look at is when you're looking for cyber insurance, have you got the controls and the pieces in place that should allow you to actually make sure from the overall standpoint, we're doing all the things, from a reactive and a proactive side. And then how do we pay for those things in the event something happens? So look at it from that perspective. So spot on, Belinda.
I think Jesselyn had a question on insurance is going to cover our ransom payment, right? So it's a good
Maybe.
question.
Yep.
Cyber insurance, so there's different policies that you can get, right? And there are ransomware supplementals to your cyber insurance policy that you would have to add. Those require a lot more in-depth application process. If you've seen a ransomware supplemental, they're going to ask a lot more questions than just a regular cyber insurance application. And in those cases, in the event that you do have your business is hit by ransomware, typically the process is you engage they usually have an 800 number that you call to report. That company, the intake will get as much information as you can provide. If you're working with an IT provider, like Center will be on that call with you, will hold your hand and provide that information and act as a facilitator for that piece. At that point, they'll typically bring in a law firm, and if necessary, a cyber broker that can go in and negotiate the ransom payment. In some cases, and most cases, they'll also bring in a digital forensics and incident response team that will take a look at the impact to your environment, assuming that your backups are okay, or they think that we can restore without having to pay the attacker. That's always going to be the end goal, right? The minute that you pay the attacker, they're going to know that they can probably extort more money from you, and they're going to come back again.
Yep.
So you don't want to feed that stray cat if you don't have to. Now, the digital forensics and incident response teams will typically drag on those negotiation conversations with the threat actor, just to give us more time to kind of get to the root cause of the ransomware, make sure that we have everything that we need from a forensics perspective, and that we can get you back up and running as quickly as possible. Which
Yep.
leads me into my next point. Al, you work with Arctic Wolf, and I know that there's a way to have certain IR firms pre-approved as
Yeah.
part of cyber insurance and ransomware readiness. Can you talk a little bit about that program?
Yeah. So as part of Arctic Wolf, we have an incident response firm that we bought, which was Tetra Defense. What that led to was the understanding more that it's very important for a cyber insurance broker carrier, excuse me, to kind of control the narrative when it comes to how an actual IR firm is picked and why it's important to get a pre-approved IR in your readiness plan, because of the fact that as an IR firm, you want to mitigate the risk as quickly as possible. So with your readiness plan, making sure that you've spoken with your IR, or you've spoken with your broker and your carrier to approve an IR firm ahead of time, so that they have the SLAs figured out, they have the hourly rates figured out, they've had the forensic or the threat negotiation firm already picked. Why that's critical and why we felt it was important to bring on Tetra was because of the fact that when you are trying to get a business back up and running, the ability to do that without having that risk of an actual case denied, because you're waiting and waiting and waiting for approval from the broker and carrier, that time to remediation is critical. That allows that threat to go more in wider and broader into the actual organization. So having the ability to know already that you can call that IR firm, you don't have to worry about payments, you don't have to worry about where things go. If the event, gets into a ransomware or BEC or a compliance issue, that you already know that IR firm can handle that. But the broker carrier can work with them and get the bills paid, but then they can focus, the IR firm, on getting restoration so that you can get back to business, 20, 30, 40% faster than you would if you're waiting and trying to figure out who you can use. So that being part of your readiness plan allows for that security posture and inside your security strategy to be more of a solid flow, almost like a workflow. And so that 30% faster is going to be key to getting your business back up and running. So proactive is the piece for having an IR firm pre-approved. A lot of times, just so you know, having a panel approved IR firm will help in all of the negotiations with a broker carrier and all of the ability to get paid. So make sure that whoever IR firm you're using is approved on the cyber insurance broker carrier side. So hopefully that answered the question, Belinda.
I think so. And James, you mentioned the cross-departmental, that it's hard to get done in the small business world sometimes. I totally agree.
Yep.
I think it's got to come down from the top, right? If it's not important from the top level, and if it's not being communicated at the top level, it's just not important to everybody in the organization. So it's got to start there. And another thing that we've, Al and I've met a couple times in preparation for this meeting, and one thing that we've talked about is incorporating it into new user onboarding. When you bring a new user onto your company, as you're onboarding them and you're going over, employee handbook and employee policies and what's approved and what's not approved, cyber should be part of that as well, right? Making sure that they're taking any necessary security education pieces that you're doing for your organization. That's another thing that's typically mandatory for cyber insurance. Do you have some way to educate your users about cyber threats? Are you doing some type of phishing simulation on a regular basis so your users know what to look for? But incorporating that as part of the new user onboarding so that users, as they come into the organization, you're really instilling that security culture right off the bat and telling them this is important to us. This is our business's data. These are people who are going to be custodians of that data, so they have to proceed with caution, or else they're putting your business at risk.
Yep. To add to James' cross-departmental side, I look at it from the perspective, and I think a lot of broker carrier firms do as well. The hackers tend to target the busiest areas, whether that's sales or marketing. There's always areas that they know they can, whether it's, identifying like, the virtual workers, the remote workers, whether it's looking at it from a phishing simulation, a smishing simulation. One of the biggest things about that is if the teams are aware, whether they pause before they click something, whether they understand that the CEO isn't asking for you to go out and get gift cards, there's ways, whether it's a small organization or a large organization, if you instill the awareness side of it, the education on phishing, smishing, social, physical threats that come into the organization, when there is an event, and whether it's marketing or ops or sales or warehouse manufacturing, whatever the case is, they will pause and they will take action. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that they have a responsibility to make sure that the organization is taken care of. If the organization gets shut down due to a ransomware attack, that costs them their job. That costs them their opportunities to work. That could mean layoffs because of having to pay a ransomware. Obviously, these are worst case scenarios, but if everybody understands those worst case scenarios and the self-awareness because of the education that you as an organization teach and work through and do a simulation, that will bring much greater awareness to the organization, but it will help alert more, and everybody will be responsible for their actions. And I think that can't be understated that is a key contributing factor to how you mitigate cyber risk. So I wanted to add that in. I think there was another question that just came around what an IR firm would do in the midst of a ransomware, but how is an IR to assist in the middle of a BEC? So Great question. The BEC, to a lot of firms, really look at it from the perspective of what you want to do is try to get to the root cause, whether it was a simulation of trying to utilize somebody's email address and basically try to get dollars. So one of the examples I always that I utilize a lot is there was an attack on a BEC that basically was they intersected an invoice and then moved that invoice to a different account, banking account, because of the payment methodology. But what they did was they intersected just really how it was transmitted. It looked very much a few little words, a few little changes, but when you're in the middle of, and it was a payable, accounting payable person that didn't really realize that this was coming from a vendor that wasn't a vendor. And so it's the awareness to pay attention of. When they looked back at it, there was, a difference in the email signature, difference in the email structure that we were able to detect and pull back some of that money. Now, there was some that was lost because there was 2 invoices, but they were able to collect and cancel one of those invoices. Luckily, the small one was the one that they lost, and that was covered by the cyber insurance, was also covered by a warranty that was given, in place of, but that's a separate one. Overall, though, it was able to be detected in the middle of a BEC, and it was able to be pulled back and then blocked. So I hope that answers your question. A lot of it is just awareness and quick reaction.
Yeah, agreed. And we've worked with Arctic Wolf on several BECs where it is really mostly a matter, and usually most people will engage because of that financial transfer fraud that takes place due to BEC. But it's a matter of figuring out how the attacker got access to the account, and then, of course, making the recommendations and the hardening necessary to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Yep, and I just stated in the chat as well, the next session, Nathan Little, who is our VP, he ran he was a co-founder of Tetra, so he'll be on. Now he brought him over to the dark side, but he's working with me on the channel side. But he's got some unbelievable stories. He's been doing it for a lot of years. He's a great person, and he's got a lot to say. So I think you should listen in on that one as well. With the time we have left, are there any additional questions that I think, could come from this, or do you have questions around how you should be prepared? What does that look like, and how often you should look at a readiness plan, updating it? And if anybody's, brave enough, can they share a little bit about their plan? How often do you look at it? One of the things I will say, I actually recommend that once a month you look at your readiness plan to update any versioning, any patchwork. If you're, changing a server out, if you're changing some infrastructure, if you have cloud, what does that look like? Are you moving things on VMware? I would look at it from any change you have updated in your planner. It shouldn't take long to do. And I recommend actually going over with your partner as well, because they're aware of it. So then when you look at your plan of attack for everybody who should be aware of an event, what that does is you've got the most up-to-date version, so that you're not scrambling the day of an event, in the middle of an event. The data that can be shared is as updated as possible, so that the IR team can actually jump in and have really the most up-to-date data to utilize. Look at it from the backup side and all the other components. I love that one. Every year I say this. So I'm going to challenge all of you to try to look at it monthly. It takes 5 to 10 minutes to update your versioning and your patchwork, but that allows more awareness. I would challenge every organization to talk to marketing, talk to sales, look at it from the operations side. What are we doing to educate the organization around how they should be aware of anything that happens, whether it's even tailgating, somebody walking through the doors, secured doors, opening the door for somebody else. I'm sure we've all done it. You may or may not know who that person is, but all of a sudden you go to your area, you have no idea if that person's still up front waiting for somebody or if they've just walked around the organization first floor, you know, putting in a Trojan horse, you know, like you have no idea what's happening unless you're pausing and aware because you've been educated. So I think there's a lot of, and I think there's a question about the foundational requirement on cyber insurance questionnaires.
Hey, Al, all I was trying to ask is that sometimes we see things that are considered advanced or enterprise get shoved down into foundational and required. Do you have an opinion on what's next? What will be the next thing that everyone has to have that they don't today?
Yeah. So I think the readiness plan is becoming a broker-asked component almost every time now. And I would say that if you have an updated readiness plan, that is what's happening. I will say that on the horizon is the control around education of the organization for phishing, smishing, social, physical, and even broader, the monitoring of the organization and what that looks like. So those three things are coming down the pipeline, I would say, and maybe Nathan can chime in here, but I would say in the next 12 to 18 months, those are going to be looked upon as controls, requirements. If you want cyber insurance, this is the way it is. So, and as he just added, backup, making sure that your backups are updated, which again, as you're updating your readiness plan monthly, you know what's happening in your updates. That is just a gentle reminder that you have to make sure your updates are, it's recommended almost, every half a day, if not every hour, to back up. So you want the most current data, and that's the best way to back up, right? So I hope that helps answer your question, James.
I would add on to that, Al, too, with the readiness plan and the incident response plan, making sure you have one of those. A lot of the applications that we've seen lately aren't just asking for your IRP, but they're also asking specifically that you have a ransomware playbook attached to it, a specific playbook for what happens when and if you get ransomware.
Yep. And that's having a readiness plan that allows that, having a run book, making sure that you can share that, having that playbook, having the ability to update it, and share it. You shouldn't, IT shouldn't be the only ones that know what to do. It should be the responsibility across the organization from executive level down. So I think we're coming up on the time.
We're right at time, and I think we answered quite a few questions that came in the chat. Again, if you have any more, feel free to drop them in there and we can get back to you after the workshop. But thank you, Belinda and Al. We're going to take a little 30-minute break and we'll be back on at 11:30. As a reminder, you use the same link that you used to join this session for any other session during the day. And as Al mentioned, we'll have Nathan Little on with Don Garner for their session on horror stories of failed incident response. So we will see y'all soon. We're not going anywhere. If you want to hang out, feel free to hang out. But next session starts at 11:30.
Thank you.
Thanks.